The modern GPU industry looks like a stable, high-tech triad of Nvidia, AMD, and Intel, but this stability is a lie built on the ruins of dozens of failed dreams. 30 years ago, the landscape was a wild west of innovation where names like 3DFX, S3, Matrox, and Trident were the kings of the hill. They powered the first wave of three-dimensional gaming, bringing pixels to life for millions of early adopters. Today, those names are nothing more than trivia questions for tech historians or dust-covered relics in a collector's basement. The graphics market is not a place for the weak or the slow. It is a brutal engine of survival where a single mistake in architecture can lead to total bankruptcy. When we look at the survivors, we are looking at companies that didn't just win a competition. They won a series of technology wars that were as much about business ruthlessness as they were about engineering. If the GPU industry were a high-stakes video game, Nvidia would undoubtedly be the final boss. They sit atop the mountain, controlling the vast majority of the discrete graphics market, dictating prices and leading the world in raw performance. Their brand recognition is so absolute that for many casual gamers, the word GeForce is synonymous with the word computer. But you have to understand that Nvidia was not born into this dominance. They had to crawl through the mud to reach the throne. In the mid-1990s, Nvidia's first major attempt at a graphics card, the NV1, was a commercial and technical disaster that almost ended the company before it truly began. They decided to use a bizarre rendering method based on quadrilaterals instead of the triangles that every other developer was starting to use. It was a bet against the industry standard, and they lost spectacularly, leaving them on the brink of collapse with almost no cash in the bank. They had to pivot, and they had to do it with surgical precision. The Riva 128 was their redemption arc, a card that finally played by the rules and restored their credibility in the eyes of frustrated gamers. By the time the year 1999 rolled around, Nvidia changed the dictionary of computing forever with the GeForce 256. This card introduced the term graphics processing unit, or GPU, to the world. It wasn't just a marketing buzzword. It was a fundamental shift in how computers handled visuals by moving the heavy lifting of transform and lighting calculations from the CPU to the graphics card. From that moment on, Nvidia stopped just competing with the industry. They started defining what the industry was. They transformed the graphics card from a humble helper into a dedicated processor that would eventually rival the brain of the computer itself. As the 2000s progressed, Nvidia maintained its grip on the market by being absolutely relentless with their release cycles. They didn't just wait for the competition to catch up. They pushed the boundaries of raw performance and software integration until the competition simply ran out of breath. Then came the RTX era, which changed the game again. They introduced real-time ray tracing and AI upscaling, turning the graphics card into a platform for artificial intelligence and scientific workloads. Gaming was the foundation that built the brand, but AI is the empire that now funds their global dominance. However, this dominance comes with a heavy price tag for the person at the bottom of the food chain, which is you. When a company controls the majority of a market, they stop being a servant to the consumer and start being a landlord. Nvidia has the power to charge premium prices because they have created a massive ecosystem of lock-in. Technologies like G-Sync and their proprietary software frameworks make it incredibly difficult for a user to switch to a competitor without feeling like they are losing something essential. It is no longer just about the hardware you buy, it is about the infrastructure you are forced to inhabit. In this story, Nvidia often plays the role of the sophisticated villain, the one who provides the best tools but demands your total loyalty and a significant portion of your paycheck. They act this way because they can, and because their primary goal is to maximize value for their shareholders, not to make sure you can afford to play the latest games at 60 frames per second. For the user, the victim in this scenario, the advice is simple but difficult to follow. Stop being a fanboy. Treat these companies with the same cold indifference they treat you with, and only buy the hardware that offers the best value for your specific needs right now, not based on the promises of future software features. Then we have AMD, the eternal rival and the only reason Nvidia hasn't turned the GPU market into a complete monopoly. AMD's role in this ecosystem is critical, even if they rarely hold the performance crown for more than a few months at a time. They are the pressure valve of the industry, the ones who force Nvidia to react, to lower prices, or to innovate when they would rather just sit back and collect checks. AMD represents the struggle for value and openness. often offering more memory and better pricing at the expense of the cutting-edge bells and whistles that Nvidia uses to lure in the high-end enthusiasts. AMD only became a powerhouse in the graphics world after they acquired ATI in 2006. ATI was Nvidia's greatest historical nemesis, a company that traded blows with the Green Team for over a decade. In the early 2000s, ATI released the Radeon 9700 Pro, a card that was so much faster and more advanced than anything Nvidia had at the time that it sent the entire industry into a tailspin. For a brief window, ATI led the world, proving that Nvidia was not invincible. When AMD swallowed ATI, they gained the ability to design complete computing platforms, combining their knowledge of CPU architecture with high-end graphics power. This platform strategy is where AMD truly shines today. By owning both the brain and the eyes of the computer, they were able to secure a massive victory that most people don't think about every day. They are the silicon heart of almost every modern gaming console. Whether you play on a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series 10, you are using AMD graphics architecture. This gives them a unique influence over the way games are actually made, as developers have to optimize their software for AMD hardware first. It is a long-term play that ensures their survival, even when they aren't winning the race for the fastest desktop graphics card. AMD's identity is built on being the more accessible alternative. They generally prefer open standards over proprietary ones, allowing their technologies to work across a wider range of hardware. This philosophy appeals to the segment of the community that values flexibility and hates being told which monitor or which software they have to use. However, AMD is not a charity. They act this way because it is the only viable strategy for a company that is smaller than its primary competitor. This as a weapon to undermine Nvidia's walled garden, and as a user, you should take advantage of this competition to keep your costs down. Now let's talk about the new challenger that has recently entered the ring, Intel. For decades, Intel was the king of integrated graphics, the basic chips inside your CPU that could barely run a spreadsheet, let alone a modern blockbuster game. When they decided to enter the discrete gaming GPU market with their Arc series, the industry held its breath. It was a massive gamble. Entering this market requires more than just good hardware. It requires a mountain of software development and a relationship with thousands of game developers. When the first Intel Arc cards launched, they were plagued by software bugs and inconsistent performance. The hardware was actually quite capable, but the software was not ready for the real world. This is the great trap of the GPU market. You can build the most powerful chip in history, but if the drivers are broken, your card is nothing more than an expensive paperweight. Intel didn't give up, though. They spent the last few years on a redemption tour, releasing update after update to fix their performance issues and win back the trust of the community. Today, their cards are credible options for the mid-range market, offering excellent value for people who aren't afraid to try something different. The risk for Intel is that they are the third player in a game that usually only has room for two. Staying in the high-end GPU race requires billions of dollars in research and development every single year. If Intel's management decides the returns aren't high enough, they could pull the plug at any moment, leaving their users with hardware that will eventually stop being supported. As a consumer, you have to weigh that risk. Intel is the underdog trying to disrupt the status quo, and while their success would be great for our wallets, their survival is far from guaranteed in this cutthroat environment. To understand how dangerous this market is, we have to look back at the most famous ghost in the machine, 3DFX. In the late 1990s, 3DF10 was the undisputed king of the world. Their voodoo cards were the gold standard, and if you didn't have one, you weren't a real PC gamer. They pioneered the idea of the dedicated 3D accelerator and introduced technology that allowed multiple cards to work together for more power. They were the innovators, the leaders, the company that everyone else was trying to catch. And then, they made a fatal strategic error. Instead of continuing to sell their chips to other companies to build into cards, 3DFX decided to buy a factory and manufacture everything themselves. This alienated their partners, increased their overhead costs, and slowed down their ability to innovate. While they were busy trying to manage a factory, Nvidia and ATI were busy designing faster chips. Within a few short years, the king had fallen. 3DFX went bankrupt and was eventually bought out by Nvidia. Their technology was absorbed, their brand was buried, and they became a cautionary tale about how quickly a leader can become a memory. There were many others who couldn't keep up with the pace. Companies like Matrox focused on image quality and multi-monitor support, but they couldn't compete with the raw 3D horsepower required by modern games. S3 tried to compete on price, but their drivers were often a mess. Each of these companies had brilliant engineers and unique ideas, but they lacked the combination of financial muscle and architectural agility required to survive the transition to the high-performance era. The GPU market is a treadmill that only gets faster, and if you trip once, you are ground into the gears. But the story isn't just about the giants who design the chips. It's also about the invisible infrastructure of board partners. When you go to a store and buy a graphics card, you usually aren't buying it directly from Nvidia or AMD. You are buying it from companies like ASUS, MSI, Gigabyte, or Zotic. These partners take the silicon chip and build the rest of the product around it, designing the cooling systems, the power delivery, and the physical aesthetic. They are the ones who determine if your card runs cool and quiet or if it sounds like a jet engine taking off in your living room. The relationship between the chip designers and these board partners is often tense and fragile. A few years ago, the industry was shocked when EVGA, one of the most respected and beloved manufacturers of Nvidia cards, announced they were leaving the market entirely. They didn't leave because they were failing. They left because the business relationship with Nvidia had become unsustainable. They felt that Nvidia was competing against them with their own Founders Edition cards and that the profit margins were being squeezed to the point where it wasn't worth the effort. When a company like EVGA walks away, it is a reminder that the entire ecosystem is built on a delicate balance of power. If the chip designers become too greedy or too controlling, they risk destroying the very partners that help them reach the masses. For the user, the lesson here is that the brand on the box matters just as much as the chip inside. Good customer support and a solid warranty are often more valuable than an extra 50 MHz of clock speed. Always look at the reputation of the manufacturer, not just the marketing specs of the processor. So where does that leave us in the year 2024? We are living in a time where the GPU has become the most important piece of hardware in the world. It is no longer just about playing video games. It is about powering the large language models, the medical research, and the industrial simulations of the future. The GPU market has become a battlefield for global influence, where the winner doesn't just get to sell gaming hardware, they get to define the future of human intelligence. And as the stakes get higher, the competition becomes even more ruthless. The villains of this story, the massive tech corporations, are acting exactly as their nature dictates. They are seeking to maximize their dominance and ensure their survival at any cost. They will use proprietary software to lock you in. They will use marketing jargon to confuse you, and they will raise prices as long as the market is willing to pay. They aren't your friends, and they aren't your allies. They are profit-seeking entities that happen to make incredible pieces of technology. Your role as the victim is to stay informed, stay cynical, and stay flexible. My advice to you is to stop chasing the bleeding edge, unless you have a professional reason to do so. The most expensive card on the market is rarely the best value. Look for the sweet spot in the mid-range, where the competition between AMD, Nvidia, and now Intel is the most fierce. This is where you get the most frames per dollar. Also, keep an eye on the used market. Because these companies release new generations so frequently, last year's high-end monster is often this year's bargain. A 2-year-old flagship card can often outperform a brand new mid-range card for a fraction of the price. In the end, the history of the GPU market is a story of human ingenuity and corporate cold-bloodedness. It is a story of how a few survivors built an empire on the bones of dozens of competitors. It is a cycle of competition, failure, and adaptation that will continue as long as we demand more pixels and more intelligence from our machines. Every time you buy a graphics card, you are casting a vote for the kind of future you want to see. Do you want a world of closed, proprietary systems, or a world of open, competitive standards? The choice and the wallet is yours. As we look toward the future, ask yourself this. If a third major player can't survive in this market, what happens to the price of your next upgrade? How much are you willing to pay for the privilege of seeing the digital world in high definition? If you found this deep dive into the Silicon Graveyard valuable, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Tell us about your first graphics card or which of the fallen legends you miss the most. Your interaction helps us keep these stories alive.